Okay, so now that you've read Little Red Riding Hood and all of the versions, including the one that I posted for you entitled The Story of Grandmother, I wanted to just share with you some of the mythological roots of this story. When we talk about children's literature, we really are talking about a great deal of mythology. So when Perrault published his version of fairy tales in 1697, this story had already had its own ancient history. And in this particular version, I'm sharing with you the myth of Cronus or Kronos. So story time. So Cronus or Kronos, his father had imprisoned his ugly brothers and sisters, favoring only the pretty ones, which are known as the Titans. And as a result, Cronus overthrew his father, murdered him actually, so that they could free his imprisoned ugly brothers and sisters. And Cronus's mother, Gaia, assisted him by giving him a sickle. And so this is why Father Time or Death on shows like Family Guy, for instance, is portrayed like this. And so Uranus, who was Cronus's father, put a curse on him and said that his son would end up doing the same to him. So this is really where we get this whole idea of the fear of the father being replaced by the son. And so Cronus began to fear that he'd suffer the same fate as his father, because that was, a curse that his father put on him. So he swallowed all of his children, also known as the Olympians, which are the Greek gods that you're probably the most familiar with, as soon as they were born, all except for Zeus. So Rhea, which was Cronus's wife, switched baby Zeus with a rock wrapped in blankets and hid him in a cave. And Cronus swallowed the rock. So once he did, he regurgitated his other children. And once Zeus became of age, he challenged his father for the throne and won. And this is how the Olympians came to reign on Mount Olympus. So these are all those Greek gods that you are familiar with, that you've heard of. Okay, so back to our story. So everything that we're trying to uncover here in Little Red Riding Hood is, what is this story really about? And then what is it really, really about? So of course, in certain versions of the story, we see where the hunter comes and cuts open the stomach of the wolf and saves Little Red Riding Hood and the grandmother. And that's very similar to what we're seeing in the tale with Cronus and Zeus being able to really kind of be the child that motivates the mother to save the rest of her children. So what we're seeing here is the theory of personality, okay, in Little Red Riding Hood. There's a lot of things going on in this story, and I think this is one of the major ones. So if we look at the theory of personality, we see there are several parts, right? We see that what we know and understand of our personality, of our awareness, is just the tip of the iceberg here. And I just love this graphic, right? Because we always use this phrase, but this is a really good way to describe it. And what's in the conscious arena is the ego and a bit of the superego, okay? And then, so we have pre-consciousness here, and this is often what we can refer to as, dream world. It's there, we can access it, but it takes some effort or some doing. And then there's the unconscious, okay, which we would call the subconscious. And this is where it gets really, really muddy, messy, all those words put together in some way, shape, or form. So the conscious is what you're aware of. The pre-conscious are memories that can be retrieved to consciousness as well. Things that you can access actively. Maybe doing some active remembering can do that. But the unconscious is what you are not aware of. And I think that in so many of these stories, I think that this is what brings these levels of consciousness to light, especially in Little Red Riding Hood. because we see different characters embodying different aspects of the theory of personality. So you see three parts here. There's the id, the ego, and the superego. So the id is what is definitely the unconscious, right? This is your subconscious. The primal personality that exists since birth. This is the thing that keeps you alive. This is the thing that drives selfish desires. It's also driven by the pleasure principle. And I'll speak about that in a few moments. I'll refer back to this when we're getting into the handout and the questions and the analysis of Little Red Riding Hood. So this refers to the primitive instinct that we all have. This is what drives immediate gratification of wants, needs, desires. This is what very young children operate out of, right? The id. This is what they know. This is necessary for survival. When a baby is hungry, the baby cries, right? And will keep crying, right, until the baby gets food, till the baby gets fed. It's a very self-centered way of living, but it's also necessary for our survival. It can also be socially unacceptable because selfishness pushes us away from people. It doesn't foster healthy community between people. And so this is something that we see very plainly in this story, because the wolf he's an embodiment of the id. That's really all he is, right? He's nothing else. The ego develops during the first 3 years of life, and this is when you learn to express desires in an acceptable manner. This is driven by the reality principle. Okay, so this is where you can start to weigh good and bad. You can start to delay gratification. The ego is the thing that keeps the superego and the id in check. When you see on television, there's a character and then they get like a little angel on one shoulder and a little devil on the other shoulder. That little angel is the superego and that little devil is the id. And the person in between trying to decide which one to listen to, that's the ego. Okay, so I think that that really clarifies how these operate. The superego is the last to develop, and it really starts to be developed around the age of 5. And this is when you come to a true understanding of standards, ideals, just noting that there's a higher self, a higher conscience, and you try to suppress the id. This is what makes us civilized human beings. So the superego is the one that's going to directly counteract the id. The id is selfish. It says, I want this now. And the superego is the thing that says, what do other people want? Is this thing that you want necessary? Is it moral? So superego really helps to kind of balance our morality, our ethics, and the ego is really kind of the one that decides between the two. And that's really what we start to see on the surface, right? Because underneath the surface, we don't see people debating between good and evil, but it's an ongoing battle all the time, right? The ego is the decider. And that's what we really see on the surface of people's actions and their reality and their personality and their character and who they are. But we have no idea what lies beneath the surface. Okay, so that's theory of personality. Now let's dive into these questions and figure out how we can figure out what Little Red Riding Hood really, really means. There is so much to talk about with this. Now remember, I'm using the story of Grandmother by Unknown. This is a story from France dated back to 1885. Okay, I'm using this in order to really break down what this story is about. So we're going to take it, piece by piece. Now in the original story, we do not know that she's wearing a red cape, right, or a red hood. Um, we don't know anything about that. And that's why I like to pick this story, because there are versions of the story where this is not always contained. And yet there are so many other versions where she does, in most other versions, she does have a red hood or a red cap, because there's, of course, the version that you read, Little Red Cap. So let's talk about why it's red. Okay. And there's some symbols that fit in really nicely here as well. Red, the color red. So meaning lust, desire, danger, sex, attraction, allure, love, anger, passion, blood, murder. It's all here, right? We see so many of those things happening in this very story. This is, I guarantee you, this is not just a story about a girl who has gone on to bring something to her grandmother and then meets a wolf, and on surface level that's it. It's not at all about that. So all those things that red mean in our culture, that's what we're seeing here. And I'm going to add one that maybe you're not thinking of, but is actually really relevant to this story and the reason that this story was told. Menstruation. I said it. I said it and I stand by it. And you'll see why that's true as we continue to talk about this. So in the 17th century, this is really important to understand, red was the color of sin. So women never wore red, okay, unless they had very bad reputations. And this is important, the fact that in most stories, in most versions of the story, we see Little Red Riding Hood wearing red. She's known for the color, okay? So she's already marked by sin. Now, we're told in different stories that this head covering, the cover of the hair, could also be like a protection from her mother and her grandmother. It could shield her from attracting men. It could be an attempt to cover her beauty and protect it. Now, if you're thinking that this sounds out of place, it's probably because you're thinking of Little Red Riding Hood in terms of how she's been portrayed in current versions of the story, which is very young, right? Looking between the ages of maybe 5 to 8. And in reality, when the story was told, it was told for a very different reason. It was really told for young women to protect their wares, to protect themselves from older men who acted as predators. And so that's what this story is really and truly about. It's about her mother and grandmother trying to protect her from the thing that she inherited from them, which is her beauty. Also note that she's going into the forest, right? This is where she must go. Now, the forest is really a symbol for a few things. The forest can represent the subconscious. It can also represent the unknown. Very serious danger can happen here. The forest is wild. There's no civilization there. There are no woods there. And this is significant because in 1885 in France, the way that this story evolved, the story of grandmother, is specific to a town or a little village where people lived, and the forest was right there. They were right in the midst of the forest. So they often had to traverse the forest in order to get to where they were going. So that's not an uncommon thing in this particular setting. But the forest can also represent the subconscious of a person, because whenever a character goes into the forest, goes into a dark, unruly place, that is significant of taking the hero's journey, which we will talk about more in depth when we get to other tales. When we get to Alice in Wonderland, we'll look at the hero's journey in depth. But for now, just note that this does represent this unruly place that the hero must venture into and does risk danger, does risk losing herself or himself. It definitely represents a journey where you have to forge your own path, and that's what Little Red Riding Hood does here. And she makes some mistakes along the way. The transformation happens here in the woods, and you have to use your own moral compass in order to navigate it. So that's why the cap is red, because we're dealing with some sin here. Now we have to figure out what that sin is, and why does it make Little Red Riding Hood wrong? Why is she the one who did something wrong? Okay, so that's what we're going to look at here. Okay, so the second question here is, why does she stray? Oh yes, why does she stray? This is the long asked question that plagues us since the beginning of humanity, since the beginning of mankind. Why does she stray? Why would she do that? And remember the slide that I just showed you? We were talking about here the reality principle versus the pleasure principle. We're basically, really, essentially speaking about this right here. We're speaking about what the id wants to do versus what the superego wants to do. So the superego wants to do what mother said. In some versions of the story, the mother says, don't go poking in all the corners at your grandmother's house, right? Take the road straight there and straight back. Take the straight path, right? Take the straight road. She's telling her to stay on path, to keep her wits and her morals about her, and she doesn't listen. And the reality principle versus the pleasure principle is really all about doing what you should do versus doing what you want to do. I mean, really, what's so bad about picking flowers? Okay, so I'm going to quote something from Bruno Bettelheim, which wrote this brilliant book called The Uses of Enchantment. And I don't require it for this course, but it's a wonderful book. And if you really are interested in children's literature and the fairy tales specifically, and the deeper meaning of these tales and why we need them and why they're so important, then I think you will appreciate this. So consciously, a child knows that there's nothing wrong with picking flowers. There's nothing wrong with poking in all the corners of the grandmother's house. But what is wrong is disobeying the mother when one has to carry out an important mission serving the legitimate interest of the grandparent. Remember, the grandmother is sick. She's very weak. She obviously can't fend for herself at this moment, and she cannot get food for herself. And so the main conflict here is between what seems justified interest to the child, such as picking flowers, and what the child knows she wants her parents, what the child knows that her parent wants her to do. Okay, so this is why it becomes a moral issue. This is why Little Red Riding Hood falls from grace. This is why she sins. This is why she's marked by the color red. Remember, if you've read The Scarlet Letter, this echoes back all the way to this tale. So what's so bad about picking flowers? Because you were instructed not to, right? And so she's being disobedient. There's another point that is relevant here. What you are free to do at home, you are not free to do in the world. If Little Red Riding Hood was at home and she was picking flowers in the garden, that would be one thing. But she's out in the woods now. She's unprotected now. And she's young and beautiful. And, oh wait, how old is she again? She's, I'm guessing, prepubescent. I'm guessing she's around that age. Prepubescent, where maybe menstruation has just started to come on. because of the red cape. And she's becoming a woman, but she's not yet an adult. So she's on the verge of puberty. It has already begun. I'm looking at question number 3 now. I'm mixing this in with why does she stray? Because this is why she strays. It's because of her age, of the stage of development that she's in. That's why she disobeys. She's old enough not to be scared of the wolf when she encounters him, but she's young enough to be tricked by him still. That's really significant here. What you are free to do at home, you are not free to do in the world. It's so important that this happens in the forest. There's another very common symbol that's used in order to note sexuality or fertility, and that is foliage in general, and also foliage-filled places like the forest or the woods. So all of that works together. 2 and 3 on these questions, they really work together. Number 4, why does she even talk to the wolf? Okay, so let's go to the story. So she meets the wolf and she says, and this is from the story of Grandmother, "I'm taking a hot loaf and a bottle of milk to my grandmother." "What road are you taking?" said the zoo. So remember, in this story, we don't have a wolf, we have a zoo. Now that's really important, okay? B-Z-O-U. That's not just a wolf. That's another name for a werewolf. Now this is why this is my favorite version, even though we don't get the red hood, which we absolutely need. But that addition is so important because unlike the traditional versions that you'll read from Perrault or the Grimm brothers, the wolf in this story is half man and half wolf. So this is about the monster that he has turned himself into because he cannot keep his id in check. Also, the fact that the author calls him the zoo as opposed to a zoo is significant because it indicates that there's only one in the area and everybody knows who he is. Everyone in the town is aware that there are zoos on the road or in the woods, and this one in particular is dangerous, right? The zoo. This is something that is most likely, I would think, most likely the one that would probably be the one to watch out for. And in other versions, we learn this, right? Because we see a hunter that meets him and says, "Hey, I've been hunting you for a long time," right? So that kind of indicates that this is not his first roundabout with young girls, right? And tricking them and fooling them and just devouring them whole. So that's really important here. "What road are you taking?" said the zoo. "The Needles Road or the Pins Road?" That's my zoo voice, by the way. Okay, so according to Yvonne Verdier, who is a scholar, and she wrote about, she writes about children's literature. She wrote about Little Red Riding Hood. This question is significant because we're getting information about her age in this version of the tale. This tells you what age she was meant to be in this story. We don't get those types of clues in other versions, but we get it here. The Needles Road signifies the path of maidenhood. when you know the trade of sewing, you know, this is during the time where you attain a trade, you apprentice and you learn a trade, and then when you're old enough, you can go out and you can work, and this is what you can do as a woman to support your family, to sew their clothes, right? To sew things for the household, comforters, blankets, quilts, you know, baby clothes. You can mend clothes for you and your children and your husband and so on and so forth. You can also get work as a seamstress and make money and etc. This signifies, the Needles Road signifies knowing the trade of being a seamstress, the change from a girl to a woman. And it implies sexual maturity then, because now at this point you're ready to be looking for, you're looking to be wed, right? It implies sexual maturity. The other road, however, the Pins Road, that's, the Pins Road is when you're being apprenticed to be a seamstress. See, there are needles and pins. The werewolf asks in this tale, what road are you on? What road are you taking? Are you dealing with needles or are you dealing with pins? Pins suggests being apprenticed to be a seamstress. So this is learning as a part of growing up. But at this point, you're not ready, right? You're not ready. You're still learning. Now, interestingly enough, in another region of France, the path was different. There was a path of little stones and the path of thorns. In another version, there was the path of stones and the path of roots. Interesting, right? So the path of thorns, that reminds me automatically of Snow White. I can't help but think of Snow White when I think of the path of thorns, because you've got the pricking of something, you've got bleeding, you've got menstruation, you've got blood. You know, this is what we're all birthed out of, is blood, right? So that's really significant here. Same thing, path of stones and the path of roots. Stones, you just kind of kick around, right? They just kind of go wherever. But roots are rooted down, like a family will root you. Like children, you are rooted in a family, right? This ties specifically to lineage, to genealogy, to maturity, to bearing fruit, right? You can't bear fruit unless you are rooted in something. And so it also conjures up ideas, the roots conjures up ideas of steadiness, stableness, maturity, stability, and also being fruitful. Fertility is what I'm thinking of here with the roots. Okay, let's move on. So that's what he's asking her. This is how we know what the wolf is. Why does she talk to the wolf? Okay, well, first of all, how does she answer this question? She says, I'm taking the Needles Road. And then the wolf says, well, I shall take the Pins Road. And so, of course, she enjoys herself picking up some needles. This has been changed in later versions to her picking flowers, while the zoo took the shorter path and was able to beat her to her grandmother's house, where he was then able to kill the grandmother and then wait for Little Red Riding Hood. Hi. Why does she even talk to the wolf in the first place? Why does she give him directions? In some tales, she'll say, oh yeah, you know, my grandmother's house is right up the way, right down. You know, she literally will give him directions in the story. In some versions of the story, why does she do that? Well, she's curious. She's a young, attractive, now fertile woman. And she talks to the wolf because it's an invitation for him to follow her. She even tells him where she's going, and in many versions, she tells him how to get there. She's luring him to where she thinks she has protection because her grandmother will be there. When in reality, her grandmother is no match for this wolf, and she learns that the hard way. Number 5, yowzers. Why does the wolf eat her? So if you're still in doubt about this whole, and I do expect you to suspend your disbelief until I reach the end of these questions, because I'm talking through all of the questions here and all the symbols and all the things that you need to know essentially in order to really believe why my interpretation is founded, okay, why it's correct. So why does the wolf eat her? Okay, well, think about it this way. If you're not signing on to the whole menstruation thing, the whole stage of life that Little Red Riding Hood is in, if you're still clinging to the surface level interpretation of this story, which is what our culture would have you believe now, then if the wolf is so hungry, then why doesn't he just eat the food that she's bringing to her grandmother? He leaves the food and he eats the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood. But if he's so ravenously starving, if he's so hungry, why wouldn't he just eat the food? And it would be an entirely different story if he did. What is he really, really after? What is he after? You know, the wolf, it's important that he's a werewolf because he represents the unacceptable tendencies in a man to just devour, not, literally, metaphorically, devour women left and right, with no abandon, no hesitancy, with no morals or ethics. He eats her because he wants to devour her, because he's driven by his id. Number 6. Oh, and it's turned him into something other than human, by the way. That's why he's a werewolf. It's turned him into a wolf. He's really a man and a wolf at the same time, but he's more wolf than man because he follows his instincts, his primal, animalistic instincts above all else. He doesn't care a thing about eating this girl or his grandmother. He doesn't feel bad about it. No morals. Number 6, why does she climb in bed with him? Oh no. Oh no, Little Red Riding Hood. This is where she loses her innocence. This is where we can no longer say she's innocent. So the first clue that she's not innocent is that she gave him directions to where she was going in so many versions and tells him where she's going. But then we have the famous exchange that I'm going to just read briefly for you here. "Undress, my child," said the zoo, "and come and sleep beside me." "Where should I put my apron?" And he tells her to throw each article of clothing in the fire because she won't need it anymore, because he's planning on devouring her and she won't exist anymore. "Where should I put my bodice? Where should I put my dress? Where should I put my skirt? Where should I put my hose?" She's completely undressing in front of him. Why does she climb into bed with the wolf? She knows it's not her grandmother. She says, "Oh, grandmother, how hairy you are. Oh, grandmother, those long nails you have. Oh, grandmother, those big shoulders that you have. Oh, grandmother, those big ears that you have. Oh, grandmother, the big mouth you have." So this is her wonder and her curiosity at a man's body. She knows it's not her grandmother. She knows what her grandmother looks like. It's not innocence. I think that people want to say, oh, Little Red Riding Hood, she was so innocent, and so she didn't listen to her mom, and she thought the world was good, and she didn't think she would be eaten, but she was, because she was too innocent to know. No, we have to take that away in order to really understand what the true story is about. It's not about her being innocent. It's about her biting off something that was more than she could chew. Okay, this is about her biting off more than she could chew. To put it simply, it's really important that you understand that so that you can understand this. Why did she climb into bed with the wolf? Because even though she's a virtuous person, she's tempted. Because her fate tells us that trusting everyone's good intentions, which seems so nice, is really just leaving oneself open to pitfalls, to a moral and ethic fail. If there were not something in us that likes the big bad wolf, he would have no power over us. She climbs into bed with the wolf because she's curious. She climbs into bed with the wolf because she wants to be there, because she thinks that she can handle it. And when she realizes that she can't handle it, it's too late. In many stories. Not in all stories, but in many stories. In the story that I'm referring to, the story of Grandmother dated back to 1885, in this one she actually makes an escape. She escapes. She tricks the wolf because she realizes that she's in way too deep. She realizes this is beyond what she's capable of coming out of alive. And so she's able to escape. But in so many other stories, she gets devoured. And I love her getting devoured because then the hunter has to come. And I love the hunter in this story because he's a great opposite character. He's the complete opposite of the wolf. And I love seeing that as well. I also love the hunter coming in because it helps to peg Little Red Riding Hood as the hero of her own story. In the story that I'm referring to, the story of Grandmother, she's the hero because she escapes. She escapes the bad thing and she lives to see another day on the other side of this experience. In some versions, she dies and then that's it. Right. And that kind of just falls a little flat. But and those are more cautionary tales, right? Trying to persuade young women to, keep their wits about them. It's really important, though, to understand not only Little Red Riding Hood's nature and question number 6, why she climbed into bed with the wolf, but also to understand the nature of the wolf. It's even more important to understand what makes the big bad wolf so attractive to us as human beings. It's human nature to want to do the good thing all the time, to want to do the right thing all the time, and yet still be somehow drawn to the darkness, still be somehow tied to the darkness in ways that we can't understand fully. Consciously, we cannot understand it. It's appealing to say, oh, Little Red Riding Hood was so naive and so she was taken advantage of. But children need a different lesson than that. Maybe that lesson makes you feel better about yourself as an adult, but it doesn't make a child feel better about themselves. And do you know why? Because children need to know that their life is something of their own making. They need to know that they have a choice in it. And we cannot keep telling them stories that would suggest otherwise. We must tell them stories that solidify the facts of the world and reality, which is that yes, evil does exist. Yes, bad stuff is out there. But you are the one that has the choice. And that is what makes you powerful. And that no one in this world can turn you into a werewolf other than you. by your own choices. If you become a wolf, you are a wolf of your own making. That is what the story is really, really about. That's something that we all need to know and be reminded of, do we not? And I think that on some deeper level, we know that, but we never say it. And this is why these stories are so powerful, and I think this is why Little Red Riding Hood is still around. Because it's not to say that the danger in the world is not real. It's not to say that the evil in the world is not real, but the battle begins within oneself first. Once you lose your internal battle, you lose the battle in the world. Whatever battle you think you're fighting in the world, if you haven't won the internal battle, you've already lost. Little Red falls because she disobeyed her mother. She disobeyed her mother. She betrayed her mother's trust. And that is what caused her to fall. She fell as soon as she did that. That was her internal battle. That was her battle between the reality principle and the pleasure principle. As soon as she chose pleasure, the thing she wanted to do over the thing that she knew she should do, she lost. So she did what she wanted to do. And in some stories, she lost her life, her whole self, because of it. So I really think that one of the big ideas here is the idea of losing oneself. We have to understand these characters. I'm looking at question number 7 now. We have to understand how the characters act. We have to understand who they are. So referring back to the theory of personality, who is the hunter? He's the superego. Who is the wolf? He's the id, right? The angel and the devil. Who is the Little Red Riding Hood character? The ego, the one in between. Literally, she is the one in between. She is the one in between when she's in the wolf's belly. She's the one in between. But she's the one who chooses, right? And she makes the wrong choice. And then the hunter comes along, right? This is such a great lesson. I love the hunter being there. The hunter is really important. The hunter is important because he's him and the wolf, they're two sides of the same coin. I love what happens here in this story. This is so complicated, but it's so beautiful as far as storytelling goes, because you've got the hunter and you've got the wolf, two sides of the same coin, good and bad, right? Angel, devil. But then you've got Little Red Riding Hood and the hunter. Now they're different, but they're also both the heroes of the story. The hunter is not the hero. Little Red Riding Hood is the hero. How do we know this? From the hero's journey. The hunter takes no journey, therefore he cannot be the hero. Little Red Riding Hood, fate looks death in the face and then comes out on the other side of it. Newer, better, stronger, more mature, smarter, making better choices, having learned her lesson. She is the hero. I love the story with the hunter here because we get to see Little Red Riding Hood being the hero. If we don't see Little Red Riding Hood getting swallowed up by the wolf, then we have to see her tricking the wolf, right? Outsmarting the wolf. That makes her a hero also because she looks death in the face, which is the wolf. And the wolf is representing the death of oneself, right? The death of one's higher self. It's a true death because he's alive, but he's not. This really conjures up those Voldemort images for me from Harry Potter. So if you're familiar with Harry Potter, which is where we're headed at the end of the course in a few weeks, then you already know Voldemort is both alive and dead, but he has already lost his moral battle, so he's as good as dead, right? He's as good as dead. Killing Voldemort is killing death because he represents it, and so does the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood. Voldemort is nothing more than a bigger, scarier, more powerful, magical wolf. That's why we have to talk fairy tales first, because every other tale that's spun comes from these tales. And these tales come from mythology, from ancient mythology. This is why we know that there is some universal subconscious of which we are all a part, that we all share, some universal identity, some universal dream that we all have, can't really explain, but we keep telling stories about it using the same motifs and tropes and characters, and they feel new. These themes and ideas, they feel new. Harry Potter feels new, but what makes it so good is that it's so old and recognizable. Okay, enough about Harry Potter, sorry. So in the theory of personality, it's awesome because you get these characters we get two heroes with the Hunter and Little Red Riding Hood, two sides of the same coin, one male, one female, one actually taking the journey and one helping, which is the Hunter. And then we've got two sides of the same coin, the Hunter and the Wolf, both male, one good, one bad, super ego and id, right? Man, here's my favorite. In my favorite version of Little Red Riding Hood, this is my favorite ending, because I think my favorite version is the one I'm sharing with you, the story of grandmother. But my favorite ending, though, is not in this version. It's in another version that you read. It's where the Hunter cuts Little Red Riding Hood out of the belly of the wolf, and then skins the wolf, skins his hide, and then Little Red Riding Hood abandons her red hood for the wolf's hide, and she puts it over her head like a cap and lets the rest of the hide become a cape around her, and then she wears it home. It's so powerful. That is what marks her as the hero. She comes back with a talisman. She comes back with a prize, with a reward, with a proof, a show of who she now has become. So, things to take away from here. That's discussing the rescue, by the way. I cheated. That's number 8. Let's discuss the rescue. The rescue is really important for that reason. We like the Hunter. We like characters like that because it's the most attractive character to boys and girls, because he rescues the good and punishes the bad. And there's something deep down in us that has a sense of what's fair and what's not. And we like to see good people get rewarded and bad people be punished, because we feel like that's how the world should be. We have this kind of just higher sense of justice, of internal justice, but really in the world it's just fairness, Good deserves good, bad deserves bad. But the reality is that we all get grace. And grace gives us good things when we don't necessarily deserve it. And it also gives us bad things when we don't necessarily deserve it. So in our children's literature and in literature in general, we really it resonates with adults and children alike when our sense of justice is served. I love the idea too of Little Red Riding Hood being cut out of the wolf's stomach like a C-section, right? It's like a cesarean section, because this is the rebirth for her. She's birthed now from the death that she faced, from the death that she suffered, and now she is new. She is better, smarter. And I have to talk about the Hunter just a bit more. I know we're all a fan of the Hunter because he's good. But the wolf represents the unacceptable tendencies within the Hunter that the Hunter rejects himself and that he does not act on. The Hunter is saving Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. He too could take advantage of Little Red Riding Hood, but it would make him much more wolf-like. There is an animal within, and the wolf embodies that as a character. But we all refer on occasion to, the animal that we all have within. That would be our id. And that would be a simile for our propensity for acting violently or irresponsibly to gain what we seek, to gain what we want. The fact that Little Red Riding Hood can come out of this, a rebirth to a higher plane of reality, of existence, it tells us that we too must be able to believe that we can reach a higher form of existence, that it is in fact possible if we can master the developmental steps that this requires. Children and adults need to know that, and they need to believe that. I think today we do a disservice. We do a great disservice to fairy tales because we only take things literally that are said in fairy tales, and really they should be looked at as these symbolic renderings of crucial life experiences and crucial life lessons. And I think that children understand this intuitively, and I think that we understood this intuitively as children, and I think we understand it intuitively as adults, and that's why we continue to share these very same tales. Little Red Cap, or Little Red Riding Hood, is the girl who died because she was tempted by the wolf. And when she was rescued by her higher consciousness, she was able to spring out of the wolf's belly and come back to life as a different person. And that idea of rebirth and renewal and forgiveness and second chances and third chances and 314th chances, this is something that we need to know, and the child needs to know that such transformations are possible. I cheated and I already answered number 9, who's the hero and why, and I told you why. That's how we know. The death of the hero symbolizes the failure. But she did not perish at her weakness. She lived at her strength of goodness. And in many, many stories, we see deaths. We see different types of deaths represented. We see little deaths. But once you have mastered those, once you've mastered the feelings that you've learned how to deal with, once you've mastered life, once you master it little by little, step by step, age, year by year, age by age, once you've mastered that, then you need not to fear your encounter with the wolf, because your encounters with the wolf will surely come. But you don't have to be overtaken by them. That is a choice. That is a choice. What is the relationship between the hunter and the wolf? I cheated and I answered that already. And what is the story really about? Really, really about? Okay, so I've said this already in other ways, but I want to say a couple things I didn't say. It's about a naive, attractive, pubescent, prepubescent young girl who enjoys herself beyond her mother's warnings and becomes a fallen woman. So on the surface, yeah. The story is really, really about staying on the path of your own virtue. This is a story about good and evil. Out in the world, and the battle of good and evil that we fight within ourselves. This is a story about if you succumb to the id enough, you become the id. If you succumb to the wolf enough, then you become the wolf. And it reminds us that we're all Little Red Riding Hood because we are forever having to choose between two paths, good and evil. There are only two. And I think in our adult consciousness, we like to understand that there's a lot of gray area. Yes, there is, but the choices that you make lead ultimately to one of two paths, good or evil. Which one are you taking? This is why we continue to tell this story. It still resonates with us as adults. You're going to meet wolves that are trickier than others, bigger than others, scarier than others. You're going to meet some wolves that you've seen before and you'll be able to recognize them and know what's going on. You'll meet other wolves and you won't. You won't. And you'll fall, but you'll rise up again. Why the happy ending in this story? Oh, geez. Okay. Well, we like happy endings. Even adults like happy endings. But for children, this is especially important. It offers a sense of security. The child comes to believe that the transformations that occur in Little Red Riding Hood are possible for them. That if they do some bad things, it doesn't make them bad. It doesn't make them the wolf. Evil is a real force in the world. You know it. You've seen it in different capacities, in different extremes. But we do know that it's real, just as we know that good is also a real force in the world. And we will find ourselves in the company of wolves at some point. And because good is a real force in the world and just as powerful, if not more powerful than the evil force, it is powerful enough. Good is. Goodness is powerful enough to overtake a whole world of wolves. So that's why the happy ending. We need to know that. We need Little Red Riding Hood because it reminds us that even if we choose the wrong path, it's not all over for us. That we can still be good and choose the wrong things sometimes. That we can still be good and succumb to temptation. But it doesn't mean that we're evil. It means that we're predestined to do it. And we're predestined to battle against it. In the end, even if we do pick the wrong path, there is redemption for us in the shape of a good huntsman. And whoever that good huntsman is of the that's up to the conjuring of your own imagination or faith. Even if we make the wrong choice, there is hope here, and there will always be hope. And I think we need that lesson now more than ever because of what's going on in the world. Deep down, all children fear that they are bad, that they are unworthy of love. If they do something bad, if they do something wrong, they think, well, my parents still love me if. And parents know there is no if. I will love you forever, period. But children think, will they love me if? The fairy tales tell us that that's simply not true. That we are always worthy of love and that we are good. Even if we do or choose bad things, we can be more good than bad.